Leo Tolstoy was a believer in the novel not as a source of entertainment but as a tool for psychological education and reform. As a supremely skilled and seductive writer, Tolstoy knew that novels need to be entertaining or we simply won't bother to read them. But he was only convinced that they have to aspire to be something else as well. Key supports for our own stumbling path to maturity and kindness. And they can do this because they are able to get into a place where we need but rarely have access to the inner lives of other people. A grain as big as a hen's egg. The definition of a parable is a simple story with a moral or a story told to teach a lesson. An example of a parable is the story about the boy who cried wolf, which is used to teach kids not to lie. A grain as big as a hen's egg is a short story in a parable form written by Leo Tolstoy, a Russian author in 1886. Summary: a group of children found something in a ravine with a shape of a hen's egg, sold it for a penny, and ended in the king's palace, which caught the king's curiosity as to where it came or where it was bought. The king, together with his chosen wise men, found out that it was a grain of corn with the size of a hen's egg. But the king wanted an answer to where it was planted and where it can be bought. The wise men suggested to ask the peasants in the town to know where the grain was grown, and they were able to ask first an old peasant who had two crutches, without teeth, and was almost deaf, but didn't get an answer. The next one is the first old peasant's father who had one crutches, still able to see, and almost heard him asked where it was planted and where it can be bought, but didn't know as well. Until finally they called the grandfather of the first old peasant who had no crutches, can see clearly and speak clearly, unlike the first two oldies. The king didn't expect the answer he would get. The field was anywhere they could plant because the very land was free and they didn't use money to buy anything. Everybody don't own money. Rather, what they own was their labor. The story ended when the grandfather said that in their time there was contentment with everything, unlike the present time where everybody is not contented with their lives. The theme or main idea of a grain as big as a hen's egg is reaping what you sow. As the old man said, the present time is so different from his time. In his time, there was no money, no trade, people had to work for his own good. Now, let's read the lesson. Written by Leo Tolstoy in 1886, this parable takes us back to a time when land and what it yielded was free for everyone. Should one live by one's own labor and be content with it, or I what others produce? One day, some children found in a ravine a thing shaped like a grain of corn, with a groove down the middle, but as large as a hen's egg. A traveller passing by saw the thing, bought it from the children for a penny, and taking it to town, sold it to the king as a curiosity. The king called together his wise men and told them to find out what the thing was. The wise men pondered and could not make head or tail of it. Till one day, when the thing was lying on a window sill, a hen flew in and pecked at it till she made a hole in it. And then everyone saw that it was a grain. The wise men went to the king and said, "It is a grain of corn." The king was surprised and ordered the learned men to find out when and where such corn had grown. The learned men pondered again and searched in their books, but could not find nothing about it. So they returned to the king and said, "We can give you no answer. There is nothing about it in our books. You will have to ask the peasants. Perhaps some of them may have heard from their fathers when and where grain grew to such a size." So the king gave orders that a very old peasant should be brought before him, and his servants found such a man and brought him to the king. Old and bent, ashy pale and toothless, he just managed with the help of two crutches to totter into the king's presence. The king showed him the grain, but the old man could hardly see it. He took it, however, and felt it with his hands. The king questioned him, saying, "Can you tell us, old man, where such grain as this grew? Have you ever bought such corn or sown such in your fields?" The old man was so deaf that he could hardly hear what the king said, and only understood with great difficulty. "No," he answered at last. "I never sowed nor reaped any like it in my fields, nor did I ever buy any such. When we bought corn, the grains were always as small as they are now. But you might ask my father, he may have heard where such grain grew." The king sent for the old man's father. He was found and brought before the king. He came walking with one crutch. The king showed him the grain, and the old peasant, who was still able to see, took a good look at it. And the king asked him, "Can you not tell us, old man, where corn like this used to grow? Have you ever bought any like it or sown any in your fields?" Though the old man was rather hard of hearing, he could still hear better than his son had done. "No," he said, "I never sowed nor reaped any grain like this in my field. As to buying, I never bought any, for in my time money was not yet in use. Everyone grew his own corn, and when there was any need, we shared with one another. I do not know where corn like this grew. Ours was larger and yielded more flour than present day grain, but I never saw any like this. I have, however, heard my father say that in his time the grain grew larger and yielded more flour than ours. You had better ask him." So the king sent for his old man's father, and they found him too, and brought him before the king. He entered walking easily and without crutches. His eyes were clear, his hearing good, and he spoke distinctly. The king showed him the grain, and the old grandfather looked at it and turned it about in his hand. "It is long since I saw such a fine grain," said he, and he bit a piece off and tasted it. "It's the very same kind," he added. "Tell me, grandfather," said the king, "when and where was such corn grown? Have you ever bought any like it or sown any in your fields?" And the old man replied, "Corn like this used to grow everywhere in my time. I lived on corn like this in my young days and fed others on it. It was grain like this that we used to sow and reap and thresh." And the king asked, "Tell me, grandfather, did you buy it anywhere or did you grow it all yourself?" The old man smiled. "In my time," he answered, "no one ever thought of such a sin as buying or selling bread. And we knew nothing of money. Each man had enough corn of his own." "Tell me, grandfather," asked the king, "where was your field? Where did you grow corn like this?" And the grandfather answered, "My field was God's earth. Wherever I plowed, there was my field. Land was free. It was a thing no man called his own. Labor was the only thing men called their own." "I have two more questions to ask you," said the king. "The first is, why did the earth bear such grain then and has ceased to do so now? And the second is, why does your grandson walk with two crutches, your son with one, and you yourself with none? Your eyes are bright, your teeth sound, and your speech clear and pleasant to the ear. How have these things come about?" And the old man answered, "These things are so because men have ceased to live by their own labor and have taken to depending on the labor of others. In the old times, men lived according to God's law. They had what was their own and did not covet what others had produced." Children, a lot of hard work is hidden behind nice things. So always remember, there is no substitute for hard work.